Well, thank you all. Today we're here to introduce and talk about the Domestic Energy and Jobs Act. As many of you know, 2 weeks ago, during the district work period, the HEAT team, the House Energy Action Team, went out across America. We were in California, we were in Texas, we were in Kansas, we were in North Dakota, we were offshore in Louisiana, we were in Colorado, we were all across the country looking at the different forms of energy. Because the number one goal that we want to have is an American energy policy to become independent in our idea of how we build our energy right here at home. Now, the one thing that we know from the perspective when I went to North Dakota is how fundamentally a domestic policy changes also the unemployment level. In North Dakota, it's roughly 3% unemployment. They don't have enough housing in North Dakota. North Dakota has gone in the 3 years since I'd been there back ahead of California in oil production and now ahead of Alaska in oil production. Technology today has expanded the horizons of how far we can go. But what's more important, when I went to North Dakota, it's not just the oil industry. I paid more than $200 a night to stay in a Best Western. I looked at the signs of the fast food. They're all hiring somewhere between $15 an hour trying to get people to work. It was walking into Walmart when I was flying back home. The one worker that flies back to California and works in North Dakota said they were all out of socks in Walmart. Everybody booms in the process. And when we look at the jobs report numbers that came back last month, there is no better chance for us to create jobs than having an energy policy that makes us independent. But when you look at what has gone on in the last 3 years, I know the president tries to claim we're producing more. We are producing more. But that's on private lands, not federal lands. So what can government do about getting out of the way? Well, if you look at the numbers, the total offshore acreage leased under the Obama administration in 2009 and 2010 is in the lowest of over 2 decades, stretching back to 1984. Under Obama's administration of 2010, the lowest number of onshore leases since 1984. It has decreased 14% in the federal lands. But what's sad about all this, that America actually has, with the new technology, could have 6 times the amount of Saudi Arabia's proven oil reserves. 6 times. Could you imagine what that would mean? If we have 6 times, could you only imagine the terms of jobs, national security, and keeping the money right here at home? There are so many ramifications to having a policy that makes us independent. So today, when we talk about this bill, it is a first step in moving us in the right direction. And we can only imagine the day that we do become energy independent. I'd like to first introduce the author of the bill that will have 7 bills and a mix of them. Our first is Corey Gardner, a freshman out of Colorado, and he has watched what has transformed in Colorado at the same time being able to expand. Corey?
Thanks, Kevin. And thank you to the Majority Whip for his leadership on this issue. There is no industry better suited to power our economy than the energy industry. We're talking thousands of jobs, American energy independence and American energy security that we can start with today through good, solid, pro-energy policies. Last week, I had the opportunity to visit in Weld County, Colorado. Weld County is the only county in the nation with 0 bonded indebtedness, in large part thanks to the development of oil and gas. In fact, last week we attended an opening of a 300-person regional headquarters of Noble Energy. They're already talking about tearing out the wall. It just opened it last week, tearing out a wall and expanding the operation. Of the 31 oil and gas operators in Weld County alone, just 2 of them paid $109 million in property taxes for the 2011 tax year. 2 companies out of 31 companies, $109 million in property taxes in 2011 alone. In the western United States, we have incredible opportunities to create jobs and energy independence. There are 22 oil and natural gas projects that have been proposed on federal lands in the West that could create 120,000 jobs and have a $383 billion economic impact. But if you look at the actions of this administration, in the past 3 years, Outstanding projects delayed over the past 3 years represent 22,000 proposed wells and the loss of 64,000 jobs, an opportunity that we lost to create 64,000 jobs. The bill that we will be introducing addresses the American energy solutions that we have brought forward time and time again to create opportunity for this country, to create jobs, to create energy independence. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve, the first title of the bill, is a bill that says simply this: if the President believes there is an emergency sufficient enough to access our emergency reserves, then the President must also increase the opportunity to lease on federal lands by an equal percentage. If the President draws down the Federal Reserves, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, by 5%, then he has to put forward a plan to increase federal lease opportunities by 5% as well. Why are we introducing this legislation? We have no plan right now to replace the oil that is removed from our emergency reserves. And if it makes sense to increase supply now, doesn't it make sense to increase supply in the long term as well? We need more than quick fix politics. We need real solutions. And that's what the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, the Strategic Energy Production Act, is all about. And with that, I'll turn it over to a gentleman who, as chairman of the Natural Resources Committee, has been fighting for years, championing for American energy development and production, Chairman Doc Hastings.
Thank you, Corey, and thank all of you for being here. Just a little history. We have already passed bipartisan legislation dealing with American energy development and American jobs on offshore energy. We did that last year in a bipartisan basis. The focus of this bill is onshore energy and, of course, American jobs associated with that. Part of that package is accompanied in H.R. 2150, which is the National Petroleum Reserve Alaska Access Act. Now, again, a little history. In 1923, the National Petroleum Reserve Alaska was set aside. Why? Because even then they realized there had to be some sort of reserve for American energy within the United States or their territories at that time. NPR Alaska has a potential of over, or I should say nearly 3 billion barrels of crude, just in Natural Petroleum Reserve Alaska, and close to 115 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. But the problem has been that even though that reserve has been set aside for nearly 90 years, the permitting and the access to that area has been tied up in red tape certainly by this administration. Case in point, ConocoPhillips waited upwards of 4 years just to build a bridge across a river to access that oil that has already been set aside. So what this bill essentially does, and this part of this bill essentially does, is streamline the process to add certainty to the process of drilling for American energy resources. If there's one thing I've heard, and I'm sure you'll hear it from others that follow me, is that those people that want to make the investment to create American energy and American jobs want to have at least some certainty in the process by which they're going to go through. This bill, my aspect of the bill, adds some certainty as it relates specifically to the Natural Petroleum Reserve in Alaska. So with that, let me turn it over to my classmate and colleague from Kentucky, Mr. Ed Whitfield. Ed?
Well, Doc, thank you very much, and I'm delighted to be here today with my colleagues to discuss the very important subject of the energy needs of our country. Over the past year and a half, in the Energy and Power Subcommittee that I chair, we've had over 30 hearings on the need for energy independence in America. And when I talk about energy independence, I'm talking about electricity, energy, and I'm also talking about fuel for transportation. And one of the common themes that has come through these hearings is that most people today, including the people behind me here, we're devoted to stimulating and committed to stimulating the economy. And a big part of that is going to be dependent upon the availability of energy and affordable energy and abundant energy. And so to meet that goal, we've introduced and passed, and it's now encompassed in this larger bill, a piece of legislation referred to as the Gasoline Regulation Act. And in my view, this is a common sense bill that most people would totally agree with. It simply says that an interagency task force will be set up within the government, and their job will be to analyze and explore the impact on cost on diesel fuel and gasoline products of the Tier 3 standards that are now being initiated over at EPA. Those standards would further reduce sulfur in our fuel. The second thing that we would look at would be the new proposed greenhouse gas regulation on refineries. And the third provision that we would look at would be the new ambient air quality standards that would affect every county in America. And so all we are doing with this legislation is, before it's implemented, let's examine and explore the cost and what will be the impact on fuel in America. Because if we're going to stimulate the economy, we do, at this particular time in our nation's history, have to be concerned about additional cost. We're very fortunate fuel prices have been coming down, but this is a further step to make sure that we do not allow government regulations to increase our fuel costs again. And now it's my pleasure to introduce a young man who's making a real record here in Washington, D.C., Congressman Scott Tipton, 3rd Congressional District of Colorado.
Thank you. I'm proud to be able to be with my colleagues here today to talk about creating American energy security. You know, in 1979, Jimmy Carter threw out the challenge for us to be able to move to self-sufficiency in this nation. With each successive decade, we've seen that we haven't achieved that goal. Is the time appropriate now, when we look at the geopolitical situation that's going on in the Middle East, for America to be able to develop its own energy certainty? I believe that the time has arrived. We can never, ever forget that the price that senior citizens on fixed income are paying, young families that are struggling to be able to get by, are paying with higher energy costs, is impacting the American lifestyle, our ability to be able to grow our families, to be able to grow our economy. We put forward the Planning for American Energy Act of 2012 to be able to deal with the public lands which are vast in the western United States, to be able to put forward a true all-of-the-above energy plan for this nation. Are we eliminating any of the environmental requirements? No. But we are putting it on the table. Let's develop wind, solar, geothermal, hydroelectric, oil shale, coal, oil, gas, a true all-of-the-above energy plan for this nation to be able to achieve American energy certainty. Under the legislation that I've included, we are going to be putting forward the requirement that the Secretary of Interior, working with the Secretary of Agriculture, develop a 4-year energy plan based off of the nonpartisan 30-year energy requirements that are estimated for the United States to be able to move us forward. As Congressman Gardner noted, we're seeing development on private lands. But when we look at the public lands of this nation and the vast and abundant resources that we can responsibly develop, this is an opportunity to be able to create American jobs, to be able to get our people back to work. When we look at that national unemployment of 8.2%, come to my district. Grand Junction, Colorado, 10.8% official unemployment. The real unemployment number is 19.5%. We can put Americans back to work. We can develop all of the above with responsible energy development on public lands as a component of American energy security. You know, I believe in the interests of this nation, in the interests of our senior citizens, in the interests of our young families that are hoping to be able to build for that American energy future. The time has come and the day has arrived to develop American energy on American soil, to be able to put Americans back to work and to be able to create American energy security. And with that, I'd like to recognize my colleague from Colorado, Representative Kaufman.
Good afternoon. I want to thank the Majority Whip, Kevin McCarthy, and House leadership for understanding the importance and need to support a productive energy policy that creates well-paying jobs for Americans. My legislation, or that is rolled into this now larger bill, is a jobs bill first and foremost. I wrote my leasing portion of this bill for the purpose of getting people back to work, because I know that so many people in Colorado and across this country are hurting for a paycheck. My section of this bill will provide leasing certainty to this industry to ensure steady, reliable exploration of our abundant resources every year. This certainty in leasing will establish conditions for consistent job creation that comes with expanded energy development. We have endured 38 straight months of higher than 8% unemployment. The fact that we are not fully benefiting from our own energy resources here at home is simply wrong. My colleagues and I in the House understand the importance of an energy policy that not only puts people back to work, but also grows the economy and provides affordable energy for families. The Domestic Energy and Jobs Act will achieve all of these for Colorado, the West, and for the United States as a whole. And it's an honor for me to introduce my fellow Coloradan from the 5th Congressional District of Colorado, Doug Lamborn.
Well, thank you, Mike, and I appreciate the leadership of Representative Kevin McCarthy on this energy issue. One of the pieces of this total bill, the package, is H.R. 4383. That's a bill I introduced that has passed the subcommittee I chair on energy and minerals and has passed the full committee under the leadership of Doc Hastings of Washington. And what this bill does and why we need it is to streamline the regulatory and legal framework that can slow down or even prevent energy projects from getting off the ground. So what this bill does is this sets timelines that courts have to act or regulatory agencies have to act. It doesn't dictate, it doesn't mandate what their decision is. It just says you have to act. You have to come to a decision. We have to have some progress. We have to have some movement. We have to have some decisions made so we can hopefully go forward on some of these energy projects. As Corey said, there's a backlog of 22,000 wells in the West. Energy wells, gas and oil, that's preventing the creation of 64,000 jobs, $4.3 billion of wages, and a total impact of almost $15 billion for our economy. Everyone says we need more jobs. This is a common sense way to do it, and I hope this energy package passes not only the House but the Senate as well. At this point, I'd like to introduce a great colleague from the state of Ohio who's on the subcommittee, and his bill was heard and passed in our subcommittee as well, Bill Johnson.
I, too, want to thank our whip, Kevin McCarthy, and my colleagues here on the House Energy Action Team for allowing me to be a part of this focus on our nation's energy policy. As we're all aware, oftentimes the federal government is behind the private sector when it comes to technological innovation. As a former chief information officer of a global manufacturing company, I understand how much more efficient the federal government could become if we were able to provide some much-needed technological innovation today. That's why I introduced H.R. 2752, the BLM Live Internet Auctions Act, which will allow the federal government to come into the 21st century and do what the private sector has been doing for over 10 years by conducting online auctions of lease sales. Think eBay, but for BLM lease sales. By conducting online auctions, we can more effectively speed up sales, reduce fraud, and ensure the best return to the federal taxpayers for oil and gas leases by conducting them securely online. Furthermore, and most importantly, this legislation will ensure efficient and timely lease sales so that developers can more quickly begin producing homegrown energy for American consumers and create much-needed jobs right here at home for Americans. Finally, this is bipartisan legislation that is supported by the President and the Department of the Interior. To date, there has been no pushback from anyone on this legislation. You know, if we had a real all-of-the-above energy policy, combined with technological innovation, combined with regulatory reform that says, hey, regulatory agencies are going to become partners in progress with America's businesses and industries rather than being barriers. I think the American people have an expectation that that's what they sent us here for. And if we do that, at the end of the day, we'll learn how to produce and store and distribute and use energy in ways that we've never imagined, because that's what the American innovative engine and the American spirit is all about. I want to thank Whip McCarthy and the rest of the HEAT team for supporting this legislation and including it in the overall package that will lower the prices for Americans, what they're paying for energy, and create jobs for hardworking Americans today.